Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wondered if being mindful could actually change how you automatically form preferences? Like what you like and what you don't like, even without you realizing it? Well, this new study might have a clue. So strap in, because today we're diving into whether mindfulness can dial down those automatic likes and dislikes. At its heart, this study asks a pretty cool question. You know how sometimes you just really like something or really dislike it without really knowing why? Our brains are constantly developing these little preferences, even for things we've never seen before. Previous research suggested that people who are naturally more mindful, meaning they tend to be more aware and less judgmental about their thoughts and feelings, might actually develop these automatic preferences less. Specifically, one study found that more mindful people didn't develop a preference for letter strings that follow the secret, hidden rule. This was a big deal because it suggested mindfulness could be a way to reduce our unconscious biases. So, the researchers in this new study wanted to see if this was true, but with a lot more people involved to make sure the finding was solid. They also looked into whether having meditation experience made a difference. Here is how they tested it. They got 127 people, a much bigger group than the first study. And first they gave them a questionnaire to measure their trait mindfulness, which is basically how mindful someone is in their everyday life. Then, for 5 days, these participants did a task. They were shown strings of letters that looked random, but some of them actually followed a hidden artificial grammar rule. Their job was to try and remember these letter strings. After doing this a few times, they were asked to rate how much they liked these letter strings. The idea was that if they unconsciously learned the grammar rule, they'd start liking the grammatical strings more than the ungrammatical ones. So what did they find? Well, first off, they were able to replicate something pretty amazing. People did learn the artificial grammar without even realizing it. This is called artificial grammar learning, and it is a well-known phenomenon in psychology. They also found that, just like in the previous study, people started to prefer the grammatical letter strings over the non-grammatical ones after they'd been exposed to them. This shows that automatic preferences were developing. But here is the crucial part. When they looked at the scores for how mindful people were, they found absolutely no connection between how mindful someone was and how much they developed these preferences. Even when they looked at people who had meditation experience, that didn't seem to change anything about their preference development either. This is where the core of the study really lies. They specifically wanted to see if, like the earlier study suggested, people with higher trait mindfulness would show less development of these implicit preferences. Remember, the theory was that mindfulness, by making us less judgmental and more aware of our experiences, might stop us from automatically clinging to or avoiding things, which in turn would reduce these learned preferences, but in this much larger, more carefully designed study, they found no such link. People who scored high on the mindfulness questionnaire weren't any less likely to develop a liking for the grammatical strings. The researchers even did some fancy statistical tests called equivalence tests to be extra sure. These tests suggested that the correlations they saw were so close to zero that they likely represent an absence of a real effect, because they didn't find what they expected with trait mindfulness. They also explored if prior meditation experience made a difference. They asked participants about how long they meditated, how regularly, and what types of meditation they practiced. Even with this extra exploration, they found that meditation experience didn't seem to influence how these preferences developed. It is fascinating how, even though more meditation experience was correlated with higher self-reported mindfulness on the questionnaire, this didn't translate into a different pattern of automatic preference formation in this specific task. So, why didn't this study replicate the previous finding? The researchers explore a few possibilities. One is that there simply isn't a true effect of trait mindfulness on this kind of implicit preference development. Maybe the original finding was a fluke, perhaps due to the very small sample size in that earlier study. Another possibility is that the way they measured preference, a simple like or dislike, wasn't sensitive enough to pick up on subtle differences. Perhaps mindfulness affects the intensity of our feelings or our overall equanimity rather than just the basic valence of liking or disliking. They also considered if the questionnaire they used to measure mindfulness, the FFMQ, might not be the perfect tool to capture this specific aspect of mindfulness. The very definition and measurement of mindfulness is an ongoing area of research. They also noted a potential issue. The implicit preference task might have been contaminated by explicit knowledge. It turns out there was a weak link between how much people liked the strings and how much they actually understood the grammar rules. This is tricky because it makes it harder to say for sure if the preference was truly unconscious. The researchers acknowledge that disentangling explicit and implicit knowledge in these tasks is complex. So, while their carefully designed study with a large sample suggests that trait mindfulness as measured by their tools isn't associated with this type of implicit preference development, it doesn't rule out other possibilities entirely. Maybe mindfulness affects our reaction to preferences rather than the preferences themselves, or maybe it needs a different kind of measurement or a much longer period of practice to show an effect. Future research might need to use more nuanced rating scales, look at mindfulness in daily life rather than just on a questionnaire, or perhaps use more ecologically valid stimuli than made up letter strings. It is a complex puzzle, and this study gives us a really important piece of information, even if it is not what everyone expected. It makes us think about how automatic our preferences really are, and whether our mindful awareness can truly intervene in those initial unconscious biases. This research tells us that preference development might be incredibly automatic, perhaps too automatic to be swayed by our current level of mindfulness. It's a reminder that understanding the mind is an ongoing journey of discovery. What do you all think? Does this surprise you? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this helpful, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more deep dives into psychology. We'll see you in the next one.